virtual Marxist library. And I see that this program is being recorded. So everybody has to agree to that. And we'll try to put the recording up this afternoon, won't we, Mehmet? So,
yes, we are recording even as we speak, yes.
Right, excellent, excellent. And there is a chat room there that is, you can actually record yourself, but we don't keep it really, because some personal stuff is in there. But anyway, as most of you know, the Sunday morning is a project of the Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library. And it was formed by the library about maybe 20 years ago to further the library's goals of preserving our written heritage and supporting the struggles for racial and gender equality and for socialism in the Bay Area and worldwide. And we're very fortunate not only to have an international group of members, but also a diverse political group of members. Some of us are members of disciplined parties, some are not, but we all share a respect for the work of Karl Marx and a belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past. And we, as a group, draw inspiration from the work of Karl Marx, including the 11th thesis on Feuerbach, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it, and that's really what we're all about. So with that, we have been fortunate in attracting some really good presentations, and Sharat will live up to that tradition. And Raj, do you want to introduce Sharat and take over?
Well, I will do a brief introduction of Sharat because he has a lot of material to present, I'm sure. So Sharat, I have known since 1974, when he was doing his PhD at the University of California, Berkeley. He then traveled around the world, and I'm always finding out that he's been to another place that I didn't know. And so he's enormously traveled. And he and I were among those who founded South Asians for Collective Action, among other people, and participated in anti-Vietnam War activities, as well as organizing the community against the rise of communal hatred in India, which was brought about by the destruction of the Babri Mosque, which was a project of the right wing in India. That's who has taken power. So Sharat has written, and he's a prolific writer, and his articles are published widely in prestigious left journals, well-established left journals, and he continues to write and speak. So we're fortunate to have him with us today. That I think I'll ask Sharat to please start. And Mehmet, could you mute everybody? That's our protocol that you.
Yes. So I'm going to mute everybody and then unmute Sharat. This is nothing personal because there's a lot of background noise and it does disturb the whole meeting. So I'm going to mute everybody, and you can raise your hand if you are going to ask questions. You do that by going to the participants tab, and at the bottom of it, you see raise hand, and you can also unraise your hand or bring it down. If you are on a phone, I believe *9 raises your hand. So we see that some people's hands are there, and we will try to give them the microphone when we are in the questions and answers period. So I'm muting everybody.
Which follows the talk. It generally follows the talk. So hold your question, generally speaking, so that Sharat can complete his presentation, make notes, and then please ask the questions later on. Sharat.
be invited to speak to the Institute for the Critical Study of Society. And so today I'm going to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. The title is Apocalypse or Opportunity. And what that means is that, you know, the impact, the unexpected impact of the current pandemic has hit us in very unexpected ways that are both bad and good. And that isn't to say that we should, you know, that I'm cheering it on, but it's interesting to look at what these opportunities are particularly for change. So that's the main point, is that it raises issues that provide an opportunity for us to really build a different world after the pandemic is over. So the pandemic has hit us at, one thing I'm going to do is that because this is not a subject matter that I'm, you know, bringing in from a remote country which nobody has experienced. This is something that we are all going through. And I know there's members of the audience who are from different parts of the world here, because we're doing this by teleconference, and you all have experiences. So during the Q&A, I welcome people to you know, in their questions, to also bring in their own experiences, because, you know, all of these collective experiences are part of the bigger picture of the impact of this pandemic. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put up my my PowerPoint here. There it is.
Yeah, we can see the screen now. Thank you,
Okay.
Sharat.
Yeah. Okay. So you should have it full screen. And I made this this graphic to sort of you know, sort of tell what I'm talking about. Is that there's the apocalyptic side of the pandemic, which has created this global atmosphere of fear, panic, uncertainty, death that we just, you know, don't fully understand yet. The social isolation that is resulting from the lockdowns, the debt that people, companies, businesses are going into, and countries just to deal with the pandemic, the economic collapse of the lockdowns, the supply chain disruption, shortages, record job losses, and displacement of migrants, just to name a few. I'm sure you can think of umpteen other things that have happened as a result of the pandemic. But there's also discussion by players who have power of topics that they have never talked about before. And these include universal health care, universal paid sick leave, housing for all. I mean, the reason that these are coming up is not because the powers that be are suddenly seeing the light, but rather because they are themselves threatened. Their own health is threatened if we don't have universal health care. If we have pockets of infection that get out of control, it's going to affect the elites just as much as it, in fact, it will, well, not as much, but it will also affect the elites just like it affects the poor and the marginalized. The marginalized, of course, are always affected more because they live in crowded conditions, they don't have access to care and so forth, and a whole range of other issues that I will get into. Okay, so this talk I'm going to break it up into basically 5 parts, and the first is just a quick review of this unprecedented global calamity, both the unexpected, its upsides and its downsides, and the unknowns that we faced, because this is a new disease. We don't know really how it how it acts and all of its potential consequences. COVID-19 in perspective, I'll just touch on that briefly because most of you are probably have already been hit with this information. And then some of the unexpected, consequences relating to the global economic shutdown, pause in global warming, which is really, really quite remarkable. And then the unanticipated responses by governments, by actors around the world, such as the emergency reprioritizations, and then the pretext for rising authoritarianism. And then finally, I'll talk about the opportunities for restructuring our social priorities to create a new world. Now, first, I don't need to spend much time on this, but this is something that has really hit all of us very, very quickly. That in a matter of 3 and 4 months, we have in 4 months, you can see on the right side is all of the countries in color that have confirmed cases of COVID-19. And that doesn't mean that the ones who don't have, there are about 3 countries that don't have confirmed cases of COVID-19 as of right now, and that's maybe because they just haven't tested for the positive cases. But basically, it has gone to every corner of the earth, even the most isolated, including North Korea. The only place that is really, really isolated because it's under a permanent lockdown is Gaza. And when I last checked, there were no known cases of COVID-19 in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. So this is really a very surprising thing. Now, the one thing that we find, here where I am in Northern California, is we go to the stores and we find all these empty shelves of selected items, and everybody says, okay, there's been a panic. There's panic buying. And I decided, well, let me analyze this a little bit, because the panic buying is there for certain items, but it is also because, look at it this way. The average, I made certain assumptions here that the average person in the US eats maybe 18 meals a week. And there's a survey that says that the average American, in normal times would eat out six times per week. So those 6 meals have now to be eaten at home. That means additional food that has to be purchased in the home. And so that is a 33% increase in retail food consumption in the United States. And that's why you're seeing the empty shelves of food. So there are explanations for everything, and we ought to put these things in perspective and not sort of jump to conclusions that it's all due to a panic. The panic is there, but it's not the whole explanation. Now, one of the really, really big changes that has occurred is that I put it this way, that I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has given Mother Earth a breather. And a breather, I mean, the other crisis, of course, the climate change, has long been talked about as the existential crisis facing humankind. Because as the Earth warms, it's going to wreak havoc with our agriculture. It's going to result in the flooding of coastal cities, and it's really threatens the human civilization. And what has happened in the course of the pandemic, in the course of the just 3 months, is that the atmospheric emissions have dropped very, very dramatically, and in a way that nobody really expected. We mention here the nitrogen dioxide because that is something that can be visualized from a satellite, and I'll show you some satellite images in a moment. the other thing is crude oil demand has dropped by more than 25%. And as a result, oil prices have fallen to unprecedented lows. And it's not just, I mean, here I show on the slide that West Texas Intermediate has dropped below $20 a barrel. But I just heard on the news that the trading price right now in Cushing, Oklahoma, which is a crude oil hub, has actually gone negative. And what that means is that people who or companies that have crude oil in hand and in their pipelines actually are paying anyone else to get rid of it, to dump it, because they don't have a place to store it. This is how much of a crude oil glut we have, because we're no longer consuming it in the way we used to. And then I want to talk about I want to mention this about the crude oil war, that price war that you've heard about between Saudi Arabia and Russia. And the fact is that the reporting on this has never been complete. What you've heard on the news is that Saudi Arabia and Russia, with Saudi Arabia sort of being the chief representative of OPEC, were negotiating for a cutback in production, given that oil prices were low. And this happened back in like February. And those negotiations fell apart. And then Saudi Arabia, in the face of the impending pandemic, okay, they knew the pandemic was coming. They knew that crude oil consumption had fallen in China, and it was going to happen to the rest of the world. Despite that, they went ahead and said, we're going to pump the maximum. We're going to pump more than, we're going to raise production to 13.5 million barrels per day, right? Which is sort of in defiance of logic. Why do this? And the idea that was put out there by the news media was that, well, Saudi Arabia is trying to capture a larger market share of the crude oil market. But what was missing from these negotiations was the United States, because the United States is the other member of the big three. The U.S. has turned from being the world's largest importer of crude oil to the world's largest producer, and now a net exporter of crude oil. And so to not have the U.S. in those price negotiations or those output negotiations made no sense. The reality of it is that what Saudi Arabia was doing, and it couldn't say that because it's sort of a client state of the United States, U.S. imperialism, was that it wanted to take a hit without saying it against the shale oil producers in the United States, because they have the highest cost of production. So the first companies that will go out of business, that will be put out of business as a result of this collapse in oil prices, will be the crude oil producers, of course, the tar sands producers in Canada, long before the Russian producers or the Saudis. Saudis have the lowest cost of production. Okay, this is just a graph that I found interesting, which is about traffic congestion in various large cities. And so the blue areas are this is over, these are daily cycles, is the amount of traffic every day in these large cities. And the blue is the normal, the historical average, and the red is what has happened in a recent week in April. And so you see the traffic is way down in all of these metropolitan centers. And that really accounts for a lot of the clean air that we're seeing. So that these are, nitrogen dioxide is something that can be visualized from a satellite. And so these are the 2019 versus the March 2020 images of nitrogen dioxide levels in major metropolitan centers, Tehran, New Delhi, Milano in Italy, and Los Angeles. So it's really dramatic, and really something that is one of the good aspects of the pandemic. Another thing that has not received a great deal of attention in the media is the impact of the pandemic on migrant workers. And the phenomenon of migrant workers in the world today has ballooned to the point where we're talking about hundreds of millions of workers who leave their homes to work temporarily. Well, it's not really, may not be temporarily, but they do not gain permanent residence in the places where they work. And so these people do not have permanent status. They do not have security of residence at the places where they work. And these are the workers who send home hundreds of billions of dollars of remittances back to their home countries or their families at home. And I cite here five cases, and these, there are many more, right? But these are the big ones. So in the United States, the impact on undocumented immigrant workers is that these workers, who are subject to the same kinds of shutdowns that other workers will not receive stimulus checks or other kinds of federal relief. And so they, to the extent that they are negatively impacted, they're not receiving any assistance to help them survive the pandemic. In Europe, one of the biggest migrant flows, and this is a little different from, yes, we have over 1 million Syrian refugees in Europe, but because they have refugee status, they at least they can stay where they are. And Europe, particularly the Northern European countries, have been very generous in providing assistance to Syrian refugees that they did admit to getting them settled. On the other hand, the migrant farm workers in Europe, this is one of those untold stories, who come mainly from Eastern Europe and Northern Africa, and they come seasonally for the harvest seasons. And they can't travel because of the travel restrictions, the cancellation of flights, the travel bans. They cannot travel, and so the major industrial countries, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, even Spain, are very dependent on these migrant farm workers, and there are over 1 million of them who can't get to the fields this year, and so the farmers are scrambling to find local hires. And meanwhile, the migrant workers, of course, are out of work for the year. In the Middle East, particularly the Gulf, there are millions and millions of expatriate workers from all over the world, and particularly from South Asia and other parts of the Middle East and Philippines. And many of these, we're talking about tens of thousands, have been laid off, and some of them got out back to their home countries, but others are stranded. And the ones who are stranded, many of them are, you see, the housing in the Gulf, among many of these workers, like construction workers, is provided by the employer. So when the employer lays them off, they have no housing. And then there are expulsions. Saudi Arabia just this month expelled 3,000 Ethiopian workers, and it gave Ethiopia no preparation for receiving people. Ethiopians didn't have facilities to quarantine these workers, so they had to scramble. China, when the pandemic hit in Wuhan, millions of migrant workers were stranded in their places of work, and China, of course, very quickly shut down internal transport. So these workers got stuck in their places of work. They couldn't pay their rents, so then they had all those problems. And then as China opens up, the transportation system hasn't fully opened up, and so these workers are having trouble getting back to their places of work, assuming that those factories have reopened. In India, there's a really, really alarming situation. Back on the 24th of March, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced a nationwide lockdown. So this is the single largest, single order lockdown in the world of India's 1.3 billion people. And what that did is it ejected millions and millions of migrant workers, mainly in cities, from their jobs. And meanwhile, the rail system, which carries most of working class people in India, was suspended service across the entire country. The world's largest passenger railway system. And so these migrant workers were left scrambling to find ways to return home in the face of the lockdown. It's totally contradictory. And so we had situations like this. We're talking about a period where physical distancing is mandatory to control the pandemic. And this is the panic of migrant workers trying to get home at a bus station in New Delhi. And so, I'm expecting that we are seeing it right now, and we're going to see more of it, is just an explosion of new cases in India. So this is the height of government mismanagement of the pandemic. And then this is one of these ineffective, irrational responses, which was migrant workers returning to a hometown, and then upon returning getting sprayed with bleach. Well, if they're infected, the virus is inside them, it's not on their skin. So it's not going to solve anything. Not to mention the adverse side effects of getting bleach on your skin. So COVID-19, I don't want to spend too much time on it. I just want to mention this because I use this talk for other audiences. But I just wanted to mention about the coronavirus being a virus that is enclosed by a liquid bilayer membrane. So that's at the bottom of the slide. And so it looks like this. And that lipid bilayer membrane, like most all lipid bilayer membranes, is, lipids are broken up by soap. And that's why the most effective thing we can do is wash our hands very thoroughly, including the tips of our fingers under the fingernails, and that destroys the virus. You may just think we're just trying to wash it away. No, it actually destroys the virus. It's very effective if the hand washing is thorough. That's what it looks like under an electron micrograph. COVID-19 we still don't know really what the death rate is. It seems to be, the initial evidence was that it was less deadly than the earlier types of coronaviruses, the SARS-1 and the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. But there are a lot of unknowns still about COVID-19, and every day I'm looking at these figures and trying to put them into trying to make sense of the data. So this graph is taking the data from these daily tables and looking at some of the countries with the higher numbers of cases, and attempting to do a projected death rate. So what I mean here by the projected death rate is that this is a rate which consists of the people who have died as a percentage of the total number of cases, plus the number of people who are in critical condition. And that's an estimate. That's an estimate because we know that a good percentage of the people who are currently in critical condition will die. And plus there are people who are well, who will go into critical condition, who will die. So that's how these estimates are obtained. Now, the significance of this is that you see the death rate seems to vary tremendously from one country to another. And the real outliers, and if you look at these figures, the death rate is actually quite a bit higher in some countries than we're generally given to believe because of these forward projections. And in some cases, like in Italy, it's because we're dealing with an older population. But then you have the outliers of Russia and Brazil. And so it's very important to be very cautious about the data because the data are collected in different ways. They're all based on tests confirming COVID-19 infections. But in the case of Brazil, it happens because the system isn't testing people who are alive, who have it. So there isn't a full accounting of how many people in Brazil currently have COVID-19. And so we only know about COVID-19, many of these cases, when they die, and then the autopsy has to determine, okay, what was the cause of death? And so the testing is done. In the case of Russia, it seems it's probable that they aren't doing, that there are a lot of people who are dying, and they don't have data to prove that the people who died had COVID-19. So that's why the outliers. Just as a so this is about like the deaths as a function of age. You see how very much age dependent it is for influenza. So the pattern, the age pattern between COVID-19 and influenza these patterns are very, very similar. Now, in terms of the containment efforts, I don't think any other graph or so dramatically demonstrates the difference between the Chinese response and the U.S. response. And so what this is the incidence, the death incidence, deaths per million population within a province in China versus in the United States. And you see that in China, it was contained to one province. Yes, it spread to every province, but the number of cases and deaths that were seen in other provinces was really minuscule compared to the death rate in Hubei, where Wuhan is located. In the United States, it is spread to every state, and the death rates have been sort of in the same ballpark. So they really are spread out, high death rates in all states of the U.S., showing that there's just a total failure to contain the disease. Another indicator of the U.S.'s failure, even though Mr. Trump calls the U.S. #1, is you see the slope of the curves. Now these are the infection trajectories for COVID-19. You see that even the European countries like Italy, Spain, Germany, France, that had very high cases earlier on, that they were able to bring their curves, their trajectories down faster than the United States. And the United States actually has the worst performance in terms of bringing their COVID-19 infection trajectory down. When you see that, this is a log scale. So as soon as the curve starts to bend to the right, that means that the natural infection trajectory is being brought under some degree of control. And you see that the United States takes the absolute longest time to do that. This is a little bit complicated, but I want to point out one point, which is that in my area here in San Jose, in the Bay Area, the sheltering in place, the starting to close down public life had taken place gradually. And one of the first places to act was Stanford University. And they decided to close classrooms to in-person meetings on the 9th of March. And this was well before anything else shut down. San Jose State University, UC Berkeley, Santa Clara University shut down the next day. And nevertheless, at the very bottom, you see that the schools, the public schools remained open for the most part. And it so alarmed parents that parents in various school districts went out and they got signatures on petitions begging the school districts to close. And so 4 days after Stanford closed, the public school districts were still open and declaring that there was no reason for the schools to shut down. And they finally did shut down on the 16th of March. And it just shows to me the irrationality, the lack of coordination, the fact that some institutions were very proactive and others, just utterly failed to protect the youngest members of society. And this inconsistency is partly responsible for the disaster that we have in the U.S. I just wanted to show these because I thought it was interesting to see how these temporary hospitals have been set up around the world. This one in Seattle in a convention center, the Javits Convention Center in New York City, in Serbia, Beograd, in an arena, in a convention center in Madrid. This one has actually seen a lot of use. There's been a lot of traffic here. And then this one is sort of a temporary hospital in tents in Italy. And this one is staffed by or set up by 52 Cuban doctors and nurses. And I want to say here that Europe has been before the US, it was the epicenter of the epidemic. And Europe, first world, received medical missions from Russia, from China, from Taiwan, from Cuba, from all these less developed parts of the world. It's like there has been a reverse flow of foreign aid in this pandemic. Now, how do we pull out of the pandemic? Well, I mean, there are various scenarios, and the only one that's really practical. So the black curve is if we do nothing, and of course these are not really to scale, but they sort of illustrate what the concept. And then the practical one is case isolation home quarantine and social distancing, which is the blue curve. And the best case is if we can do 100%, we can bring this to a close before a vaccine becomes available, if we can do 100% case isolation. And that requires 100% testing. And we're a long way from that, but that is a potential way out if we can manage that. I just want to say that because I don't want people to be so pessimistic that we're in this until the vaccine comes another year from now. Now this is an interesting thing because there have been divergent responses from capitalism, basically. The first one is pharmaceutical companies pledging to share resources, clinical trial data, and to work together with governments to increase testing, develop treatments and vaccines, and find solutions. And so that's a good side. I mean, of course, they're doing it only because they have to, because it's a matter of survival for all of us. Not because they wouldn't do that in normal times. One company, AbbVie, based in Chicago, announced that it will no longer enforce its patents anywhere in the world on Caletra, which is a combination drug consisting of 2 antivirals that have promise for treating COVID-19. The 2 drugs are lopinavir and ritonavir. So that was a nice announcement. And then on the other hand, you had Gilead Sciences that applied for its antiviral called remdesivir. They applied for orphan status with the FDA. And what that does is it gives the company exclusivity on sales and right to set prices for 7 years, along with various tax incentives and other benefits. And it filed for that in early March after it knew that the COVID-19 was developing into a pandemic. And because of public pressure, 2 days later, after it received the approval, it bowed out and said, okay, we're gonna ask the FDA to rescind that. So this just tells us that public pressure is important. When something goes wrong, it's very important for us to get out there and protest and demand that companies do the right thing. There are a whole range of unprecedented responses from power structures, talking about things that they've never talked about before. So one of them is obviously universal provision of healthcare. Universal healthcare is something that activists have talked about for years and years, and now it's the elites finally start talking about it, because if we don't have universal healthcare, if everybody doesn't get treatment, then it's going to adversely affect public health for everybody. So that's why it's coming about now. But it's an opportunity for us as activists to make this universal healthcare something that we commit to long after the pandemic ends. Paid sick leave, because we don't want sick people making food or working in producing things that get contaminated. Housing the unhoused in currently vacant hotel rooms. I can say a good thing about California is that the Governor Newsom here in the state of California negotiated with hotel chains to make available 15,000 hotel rooms to temporarily house homeless people. And the priority has been to house people who have homeless people who have COVID-19, so that they can quarantine. There's been a lot of talk and actually movement on putting a moratorium on evictions. There are laws or orders in effect now in the state of California blocking evictions. And then there's talk about placing moratoriums or delays on rent. Of course, the bailouts around the world are unprecedented. We're talking about so far about at least $10 trillion worth of bailouts by developed country governments. There's talk about restructuring food chains. I mean, we were already adjusting food chains and trying to grow more food locally, because that would, local food production is less subject to disruption by calamity. Considering the origins of the coronavirus jumping to human populations in wild animal markets, people are talking, at least some people are talking about reducing meat consumption, which would also be good for our health, and then just changing our ways of work to reduce commuting. Now, some of the big ones are that could really have an impact are response to the talk about sanctions. And as most of you know, the world's #1 sanctioner is the United States, because it has the power to do so, and because it controls the dollar, the world's reference currency. And recently, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for global waiving of sanctions to avoid impeding the antivirus efforts. And with a specific focus, I mean, the newspapers like the Financial Times have talked about this is the time to waive sanctions on Venezuela. Many organizations, activists around the world have called for lifting of sanctions on Iran to enable it to combat COVID-19. So, this is something that there's good reason. There's good reason for global public health to lift these sanctions, and I hope that we can use this opportunity to make this happen. Prisons has been very interesting, because prisons are of course conditions of immense overcrowding, and we know that COVID-19 cases have happened in prisons, and so which means that it would just spread like wildfire. So there's been an unprecedented effort to decarcerate, to take non-violent inmates and release them. In Santa Clara County alone, where I am, something like 600 non-violent inmates have already been released from jail. And the United States in particular is the world's largest incarcerator. We incarcerate 2.3 million people. This is a rate of incarceration that is the highest in the world. There's no reason to imprison that many people. So it's time to decarcerate. Essential workers. Well, this I all the time read about our leaders applauding the essential workers, or in particular the first responders. And the first on the list is nurses and doctors, paramedics, police, fire. But what is left out of this discussion and is only belatedly discussed is the other essential workers in our society. These are the workers who cannot shelter in place. We're talking about the farm workers. We're talking about the truck drivers who move that food to the grocery stores. We're talking about the grocery store workers. And the Financial Times put it very aptly. This pandemic exposes an uncomfortable truth. Those we need the most are often those we value the least. And they're the lowest paid. Coronavirus has forced us to rethink how we value and how. Some of the workers we left to languish in low-paid and insecure jobs are the very ones we cannot live without. It's not just time to be grateful, it's time to make amends. And so as May Day approaches, May 1st, we in San Jose have started this hashtag, "We are always essential." And what that is to draw attention to the fact that farm workers and other essential workers are essential. First of all, they are essential along with the first responders. And they're not just essential during the pandemic, they're always essential, even during normal times. And let's recognize that in normal times. And these are striking nurses. We are always essential. And I hope that is one of the lessons that we can pull out from this pandemic period. People who sell food. And the other thing I want to say is this: I'm also a peace dancer, and these days I'm peace dancing with physical distancing and social solidarity. And the mainstream has coined this term social distancing, and that's a bad word. It's not social distancing. It's physical distancing with social solidarity. That's how we're going to pull out of this, and that's how we're going to change. We're going to change the world going forward. And so here it is. Not social distancing. We're talking about social distancing and social solidarity. Okay. Thank you. And
thank you, Sharat. And I think at this point, Gene, we'll go to Gene for his appeal and announcements, and then we will start with the question and answer session. Gene? We don't, you're still muted, Gene.
It clicked, but now I'm okay, right?
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Sharat. That was excellent, as we expected, and perhaps even better. So it's good and very thought-provoking, and I'm sure we'll have a good discussion. But before we go over to the discussion, normally we have a fund appeal, and I don't know if Richard wants to say anything about the fund appeal.
I do.
Pardon?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, why don't you go ahead and say something about our funding situation, and then I'll go talk a little bit about future programs. So go ahead.
Okay. We've as you know, we have not, since we've gone to this remote conferencing, we haven't had an appeal, and we haven't been meeting at the library. But our main expense is still to the library, and we have obligations to that physical entity. It's our home, and hopefully we will get back to it. So I would like to ask people to contribute. And if you would, Sharat, allow me to share my screen, I will show you how to
yeah, you can share your screen.
Okay.
Richard.
Wait a second.
There's a green button at the bottom.
Yeah, I did. Let me get it. Can you see that now?
No.
No, you have to click on the share screen and then select what you want to share.
Yeah, I have the, okay. So it should show up.
Well, you have to go to remove this screen that we are seeing right now as each other. So you have to go to your screen where your information
screen. It shows me, doesn't show me the
at the very bottom of your screen there is a green button.
Yeah, I clicked that.
Okay, click that. What comes up after you do that?
Share.
Yeah. You have to
No,
select
that's
the
not what I
share.
want to share.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not showing me what I want to share. Oh, here it is. Okay.
And then you have to, yeah,
Okay.
there you go. There you go. I think
Okay.
it's up now.
So I've set up a PayPal account, and if people would like to, that's the most simple. You can, if you have a PayPal account, you can transfer money to this account. I've set up an account, icssunday@yahoo.com, and they'll ask you for my name, and you enter that, and the money you can transfer. It'll transfer from your PayPal account to our PayPal account. The other and the other alternative is to simply send me a check, and it shows you what the details on the screen also. If you have some other way of transferring money you would like to do, simply send me an email at that icssunday@yahoo.com, and we'll work it out. But we're a little bit behind our what we're sort of budgeting for. So if you haven't had because you haven't had an opportunity to donate in the last few weeks, I would urge you to be generous and send us a large amount. Thank you. That's all. Back to you, Gene.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much. Thanks for putting this together. I hate these kinds of things personally, as you know, but it is essential. And you know what we do here at Sunday morning is basically intellectual work, but I think that should be classified as essential work because it's really important that we just don't go willy-nilly into this and we try to filter out which is fake and which is not in the fake in the news. And that's difficult. And that requires some intellectual training. And I think we need to continue our work. And we are going to continue that in the next few weeks because most of us agree with the basic premise of Marxism that, you know, the solution is a revolution and socialism. And we're going to talk about two important variants. First of all, next week, Raj is going to talk about Lenin's because it's Lenin's 150th birthday, passed without sufficient notice. We did have a program that Sharat put on, but Raj is going to talk on that. Do you want to say anything about that, Raj?
Yes, actually, thank you, Gene. I'll be speaking, and I have to send you that. There's the topic would be Lenin on democracy and dictatorship and how that relates to our time now. And so that would be the heading of the presentation. A blurb I will send to Gene, which will be posted. And if you go to, if you're on the distribution list, you'll get it from Gene. There is also on a website, Gene, that it goes. But if not, the distribution. In any case, you can come back on next Sunday to this program, and you will hear me on that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Raj. And I'm looking forward to that, and I think we all should be. And I will put it up on get all those things taken care of, put it up on the web and our emails. The other thing I want to stress is following that, we're going to go from Leninism, and many of us consider ourselves Leninists, but we have to know that Leninism isn't all that popular in the United States. However, things that are very important are happening in the United States in what I call the Bernie movement. So I want to talk a little bit about that in the following week, because many people think that Bernie was the first, or we may know about um, Eugene Debs, but we don't realize that socialism in the United States goes back almost 200 years when Robert Owen arrived to set up a utopian community here. So there's a long history here I think we need to be aware of. And then after that, Sharat is going to give us a talk on sanctions. I hope we'll get that together by then. We'll push him on that. So back to you, Raj.
Okay, so we are in the question answer or comment section of the program, and we will finish at 12:30. So we have 55 minutes. And so the process is you raise your hand, either physically, so we can see in your picture, you're raising hand, or electronically, there is a way to do it. I already see hand raised on the front this screen. And then please limit your comment or question to the presenter today, Sharat, to 2 minutes. And I will keep track of your time, and I'll let you know as you approach it, and you're about 10 seconds away from your 2-minute limit, then you try to wrap it up. And then Sharat will not have that restraint of time, but I'm sure Sharat will be brief so that we can get to everybody. So if that is agreed to by everybody, if that's our process, that's our usual process. So we'll go to the first person there. Hold on a second. I have, okay.
Those people,
so
Raj, those people who are going to speak, try to unmute themselves first. Otherwise,
right. So yeah, they have to unmute themselves. Or yeah, okay. So Blair B, the first hand is Blair B. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Sharat. This is Blair from San Jose.
Hi, Blair.
Thanks a lot for your lecture. It was nice to hear a familiar voice talk about subjects, and I appreciated your summary process. I'm at the point where I want to start to learn more healing aspects of exactly, you've talked a bit about, there could be very positive changes that can happen. I want to really learn what exactly can be those, how to bridge, to bring ourselves into that realm of what can be positive changes. And maybe in future lectures for yourself, maybe that's something you can learn to address more, just as to note. I had a few questions, choose which ones you can answer. How are state of California undocumented aid packages progressing in Sacramento at this time? Is it the U.S. that is forcing the concepts of war in Syria and Iraq in this time? And if this is so, can there be demands for an immediate stop to this? And can we then rely on the Sochi peace accords to then address the many issues at this time, including the sanctions process? And finally, can it be talked about how to use positive energy and sustainability to address the issues of the earth at this time? Those are my questions for you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Blair. So these are, I mean, this is what I'm talking about in terms of, the opportunities of the pandemic. It's a time which is forcing everybody to rethink the way we do things. I mean, we are changing our behavior in response to the crisis, and this is a time to think about how we change our behavior going forward, individually and collectively. And in terms of things like the war in Syria, when in war there's this contention between forces that consider the other side. In the case of Syria, it's many different sides. It's a multi-sided war, which is very unusual, where these other sides are enemies. But we all have one common enemy right now, which is COVID-19, and so this is a time when when it absolutely makes sense that if we want to win the war against this one common enemy, we have to stop fighting ourselves. And so there's been a lot of talk about this behind the scenes, and also like in the United Nations, whether it actually happens, to what extent it happens, that wars will stop, that sanctions will stop. I mean, it still remains to be seen. In terms of healing, yeah, I mean, this is why I started doing the dance of peace. It's also a method of self-healing. It's healing for others who see it, and I get to get people to participate in it. So there are lots of opportunities here, and we just have to put our minds to using this moment to heal and to make and to advocate and to make the changes that are needed. The pandemic makes it transparently clear the kinds of changes that we need.
Thank you, Sharat. It's Norma who's next in the list. I'm going to unmute her. Sorry. Go ahead, Norma.
As far as gathering forces to work on change, Code Pink is working through the internet connections that we're all working through to deal with sanctions. So if you'd like to take some very activist involvement, you can look up Code Pink. I don't think it's classified. Somebody's coughing. Stop coughing. Stop coughing into our group. You can look up Code Pink by those two words, and if you need to say anything, well, I didn't look up the exact address to post. Maybe I will to work along with them on some very important issues, sanctions. And somebody watch your speaker. Stop making noise on us. Close your speaker. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you. So Code Pink, the website is codepink.org, and their biggest campaign is to end sanctions on Iran. As many of you know, Iran is one of the countries that has been very hard hit by the pandemic. Nevertheless, Iran has managed better than it is. Just a couple of days ago, Iran was overtaken by Turkey in terms of the pandemic, the number of cases, despite the fact that Turkey has no sanctions and Iran is under full U.S. sanctions. And I want to mention that those U.S. sanctions against Iran have impacted Iran's import of medical supplies, medical devices. So this is not inconsequential during the pandemic. These sanctions need to be lifted for humanitarian reasons.
They're also working on Venezuela
and
on Yemen, a number of nations.
Okay, thank you, Norma. The next person whose hand is raised is John Walsh.
Hi, very good talk. I liked it a lot. And the World Stat, what was it? The website you gave, some of your stats came from was Our World according to statistics or something?
Our World on Statistics, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very good. It was very, I was looking at it here as you were speaking. And I wanted to ask, you mentioned Iran. Iran has done remarkably well. And my understanding is they did that in a fairly low-tech way, that they had 300,000 teams, 2 to a team, go out and essentially survey every household in the country to find out where the cases were. Do you know anything about that? There's been very little about that in the Western press.
Well, yeah, I mean, Iran is an organized. I mean, it is one of those countries that has internal organizations, and so they have the ability to mobilize, teams to go out, throughout the country. And the pandemic has been focused in several areas. So Tehran, certainly, Qom, the religious center has been another focus of the pandemic. So, to the extent that they could use these teams to contain it to these, focal spots, that has been very helpful. But nevertheless, the country has still been hard hit. It's still one of the top 10.
Okay, Sharon is next. Your hand was up.
Yes. In my opinion, now is the time for the formation of unemployed councils or the unions of the unemployed. And I think that all of us who are members of a union should be demanding that the AFL-CIO take the lead on that. Of course, those unions are going to have to be formed by the people themselves, but I think that the trade union movement should be facilitating that as much as possible. A lot of the unemployed are the so-called self-employed and gig workers. It's an enormous number, more than you would have thought a few years ago. And those people in California, at least, have not even gotten any of the so-called unemployment benefits that are supposed to be coming their way. The state, last I looked, the state had not developed their website, built out the website enough to accommodate those particular people. I have a friend who's in that category, and we've been looking every day to see when the state is going to get around to it, even though the governor keeps saying that they're doing it. So I think all of us should be asking the AFL-CIO to take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to respond to that, Sharat, or shall I move to the next person?
No, I think it's good information but yeah, I don't have any further comment.
Okay, Kim, you are next. I'm going to unmute you. Sorry.
Okay, well, again, this has been very good. Thank you. And
no, it's not you, it's Kim.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kim is, I'll go to Eugene next, okay? How about Kim first?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, Sharat. I wanted to mention in the description of today's talk, it mentions 2 existential threats. I think there's one major existential threat that's been left out, which is nuclear annihilation. So I just wanted to make that comment. And then I wanted to ask you, Sharat, because you mentioned in your talk about migrant workers coming to Europe to do the harvest. And so I have a question about timing, because we're in the spring now, and I'm assuming that European harvest takes place in the fall. So have European countries already made the decision to not allow migrant workers to come into Europe in the next 3 or 4 months?
Well, so there is a harvest. We're entering a harvest season. I mean, so all of the vegetables and fruits that we get at this time of year need harvesting. So the farmers are already scrambling to find labor, and the transportation systems in Europe are a lot of it is shut down. Everything's running at like 10% capacity, and then there are the travel restrictions. So many countries are preventing people who are not citizens or permanent residents to enter those countries, and these migrant workers are not permanent residents of the places where they traditionally work. and that's why they cannot travel. They cannot go to work.
Thank you, Sharat. Jean, you're next.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it really is encouraging, and I'm glad to see so much kind of self-organizing, positive things happening. United Nations Secretary General called for, ceasefire, and these are positive things. And I ventured out into the real world yesterday and saw a bus go by, and it had a sign, enter through the back door, no fares collection. Well, apparently Alameda County is no longer collecting fares for public transport, which is something really good. On the other hand, as a Marxist, I understand that there is class struggle. And what the coronavirus has done overwhelmingly, I think, has intensified the class struggle. There are lots of positive signs going on about people understanding what's going on and taking positive steps. How strong they are, I don't have any real way of judging. But I know that the 1% are mobilizing to protect their interests. And I remember I was watching something which showed a picture of a yacht, I guess, of the fourth richest man in the world. And it said, he is social distancing in his yacht. So there's a big difference. And the ruling class is planning to maintain its rule by any means necessary. And I think we need to maintain a class struggle perspective on what's going on. And I'll stop there.
Raj, would you turn off this phone? I wrote you a note, and the telephone number 510-282-9408. It's at the bottom of my.
Hello, that's Rich. I want in.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, but he's making a lot of noise in the meantime, and he's leaving his microphone.
I'm not controlling that. Mehmet, you want to look into that? So Jean,
Okay.
do you want to, I'm sorry, Sharat, do you want to respond to Jean, please?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I fully agree that this is the class struggle, is sharpens in time of crisis, because the impact of the pandemic is never equal, across classes or different social categories. It's just like the people in slums are crowded together, and so the opportunity for spread of the disease is much greater, and it's the wealthy who can shelter in place in their mansions, and they don't even have to venture outside because they have servants who can do their shopping for them. So the class contradictions are always sharpened in times of crisis.
Okay, so I'm going to go to a person whose name is Arzang, A-R-Zang or Arzang?
Arzang, yes, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Ajahn.
Go ahead.
Hi, Sharat and everybody else. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I missed the main part of the program. I'm interested to listen to the recording, hopefully soon when I get the copy of it. I just heard a couple of comments about Iran. And I would like to share my opinion about it. So please, the only thing I want to share here is please not to jump to the conclusion about what's going on with Iran as far as how the system is reacting to saving people's life as a result of this virus. From my understanding, again, I'm trying to not just tell you or share information based on progressive opinion that I am in touch with, but also from other sources. My understanding is the system in Iran is highly doesn't have any management control, lack of management in controlling this virus. For example, the supreme leader says one thing, the president says another thing, did expert doctors say and not completely different things about what's going on. So what you hear from government versus other sources is contradict a lot, but the real fact and what's going on over there. And so please be careful about what's going on. Many times, the things I hear from, for example, Trump, it's exactly what I hear. It's similar that I hear from President Rouhani of Iran.
10 seconds, please wrap it up.
Yes, so all I just want to say is when you guys speak or share information about Iran, be more careful. A lot of governments do not reflect the facts, as we know. It's not just unique about Iran.
Okay, thank you very much. Sharat, you want to respond to that?
No, the point is well taken. I mean, so we always, have to rely on multiple sources, never rely on government alone, because every government has a self-interest in painting a good picture of what it is doing. Iran is no exception. And so that's, the point is well taken. Thank you.
Okay, David Makovsky.
Yes, okay, well, thank you. A wonderful talk, but one of the most amazing consequences is the effect on wide swaths of industry in the capitalist class. Entertainment, dining, I mean, there's travel, tourism, all of these are barely able to sustain the limit on travel and on entertainment. And much of the cause of the current opposition to the shelter in place comes from people whose industries are very seriously affected and cannot be adequately compensated. In other words, this entire issue of dining and travel and tourism, and I think before long, we're going to see a transformation of Western capitalism. I'm not sure into what direction, but many people are being bankrupted that are actually quite wealthy.
Thank you. So,
yes.
Sharat, you want to respond?
No, I mean, I wanted to say that yeah, I mean, the one of the areas that is hardest impacted is of course the travel industry, and just like airlines, airline flights are down 90%. I mean, this is unprecedented, I mean, it's going to take a long time for the travel tourism industry to recover. It will be restructured. There's no doubt about that. Even after the pandemic is over. And it's an opportunity. Again, it's an opportunity for change. The question is how can we seize this moment to change things for the better.
Okay, so Sharat, I was going to ask you a question as well, and I don't see any hand raised, so I'll go next. So Sharat, I agree with you that this is an opportunity for change, and your activism and calling for a different solution is absolutely the good thing. Now, in the 20th century, the big thing was a so-called Spanish flu, which actually was a Kansas flu, but it just got named Spanish flu. It started in Kansas. And it was during the First World War, soldiers brought it to Europe, and then the soldiers, wherever they came from, when it went with them. Indian soldiers were with the British Army, and that's what primarily used to fight for the British officers, were the Indian soldiers and soldiers from other countries. And they brought it to India. Consequently, 18 million Indians died in that. And at that time, the population in India was about 180 million, if I'm not mistaken. So it was like 9 or 10% of the population died. Okay, and in the United States, 675,000 people died. And the US population probably was probably around 100 million or less. So it was significant loss of life, and of course in Europe and other countries. But I never saw this mentioned as a changing the word. I mean, what changed seemed like what we heard about is the Russian Revolution and all the revolutions that were occurring. But I was not able to find mention of that in the literature, among the Marxist literature of Russia about this epidemic. So I was just curious, not to challenge a thing, but it obviously had impact. But do you know any, I mean, do you have any comment on that?
I mean, it's a good question. I haven't actually looked at it, so I don't know the extent of the Spanish flu in Russia in 1918. So I really can't comment on that. But it is important to put these things in perspective. I mean, even the influenza, which we sort of take for granted, kills anywhere from 200 to 500,000 people every year around the world. So if you put COVID-19 in that perspective, it seems like, well, the death toll so far is doesn't approach that, but the death rate is higher. The big difference is the fact that with COVID-19 there are many unknowns, and we don't have a vaccine, and that's what happened in 1918 with the Spanish flu, it devastated because we didn't have a vaccine, and with the influenza, because even though we do have a vaccine, there's still this high death toll, but people, the elites, can protect themselves by getting vaccinated, and so there isn't this kind of fear and uncertainty. So those are some things to put in perspective.
Okay, thank you. There is a person whose phone number ends with 9408.
That's Richard Johnson.
Richard Johnson. So I'm going to unmute him.
I think he had his hand up to talk.
Yeah, I know. That's who I'm going to next. Yeah. Richard, go ahead.
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, I have to unmute, and I'm working on a cell phone, which is very different. It's like I'm in the dark the whole time, and I had something earlier to say. Actually, my wife did, but it's passe right now. But I do want to say, well, first of all, I thought what I was able to hear of Sharat's thing was very good. But I'm also once again at a loss for the what do you call it, any visuals, no visuals. I'm talking about everybody on their phone that doesn't have visuals. So it's just something to think about. This last little thing about the impact, I thought that was really good, that caveat also, because how can you think about this and not think it's going to change the world, change the capitalist, functioning, etc. And yet, how much did that have anything to do post 1918? Most people didn't even remember that. At least it came very late in the conversation. In the last few months, came up in the last few weeks, I think, that I remember. So anyway, that's just a comment. But I just, I'll look for the follow-up on this. Okay, my wife has remembered or thought of something. Hold on, this is Kit.
Hi, this is Kit. In terms of the Spanish flu, it was what I read was named Spanish flu because Spain was the only country reporting on it, whereas other countries were not reporting on the Spanish flu. And then the other thing is that in terms of another aspect, and I'm sorry we didn't come earlier, but the whole environmental issue, I mean, there's an opportunity for the environment to improve. However, I'm concerned that once the restrictions are lifted, that we'll just go back to what we were doing before, which does seem to happen. But the seriousness of climate change has not gone away, even though animals are returning briefly. So I don't know if folks saw the movie by Michael Moore, the latest one that he's produced, is a pretty damning report about how corporations have partnered with some environmental organizations. And to me, that was pretty shocking to hear all the details in this film. I think you guys will be able to catch that. It's online. It's Michael Moore's latest movie, and I can't remember the name of it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sharat, you want to respond to that before I go to Karthik? Who's next?
No, I just, it's a good, thank you for the comment. Yeah.
Okay, Karthik, you're next.
Hey, Sharat, thanks for the speech. I had joined very late. I will go through fully. I have one question regarding when we are talking about the working class solidarity at the international level. This corona pandemic is used by the sectarian forces, especially the petty bourgeois and the bourgeois media, that they are trying to sue China with millions and trillions of dollars. And some countries not yet officially taken the stand, but they are not condemning this disruptive acts. So what is your comment on it? How the countries like France, UK, US will react to this suing theory or initiative?
Well, okay, I haven't heard about this, so it's new to me. But I mean, there's been, you know, there's been talk from Donald Trump and from other quarters about, you know, blaming China as if this were some kind of deliberate act. There are conspiracy theorists who say that the coronavirus was actually created in a lab as a biological weapon and then released. And you know, we don't have any evidence of this, so I'm not going to go to any of these conspiracy theories until somebody comes up with some concrete evidence. I mean, if it were this dangerous, it would have you know, backfired on the lab itself. And we haven't seen the lab where it ostensibly started. So yeah, I mean, there is a tendency on, you know, of certain groups and certain people to blame this on China, and some blame. I've heard people say that you know, they blame the U.S. military for planning it in China. But again, these are conspiracy theories. There's no evidence for that. And I mean, we have to. For me, you know, I just have to stick with the facts, and because it's entirely, at this point in time, it's still entirely reasonable that the virus, you know, made a jump from an animal host, a wild animal host, to a human host, and this happens. It has been documented with other diseases, and so that for the moment, that is the explanation. And if that is so, if that holds out, you know, there's no basis for a lawsuit. And the lawsuit, in my view, is diversionary. There are leaders who would like nothing better than to find an external scapegoat. That doesn't solve anything. We have to be united in the whole world finding a solution to this.
Thank you, Sharat. It's Richard Lipper.
Yes, hi. I'm wondering if you can comment on the different responses the various capital countries in the world.
Richard, there is an echo. Is there something going on your side that's causing the echo?
Not that I know of. Is this better?
Okay, it's okay now. It's okay now.
I moved my cell phone.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was doing.
I'm wondering if you can comment on the different responses the various capitalist countries in the world have had. I mean, our system, our form of capitalism seems so dysfunctional compared to others. For example, South Korea or Australia or New Zealand or any number of countries. And just commenting on that, if you've had any perceptions around it. And I'm also thinking that there'll probably be an onslaught of media and government propaganda once this is resolved, this situation, trying to show the very opposite in order to preserve the system, lying about how effective we were, how good we were in dealing with it. So I think we should prepare ourselves for that as well. That's it.
Sharat, do you want to respond to that?
Yes. So definitely there will be scapegoating. Definitely there will be, attempts by capitalist leaders and governments to paint themselves in a good light. And the earlier part of your question about the different responses, I think it is very important to look at the different responses and to try to understand what works and what doesn't work. And I mean, I think that among the advanced capitalist countries, the U.S. response is the absolute worst, because there hasn't been consistency. Basically, it's been left up to the states to determine the individual responses. We see now that these latest states, Georgia, Oklahoma, and one other that are opening up. They're opening up with totally different policies, and it's the same virus. How is it that opening cinemas in one place and opening barbershops in another place makes any sense? So it's an irrational, inconsistent approach that is responsible for the disaster in the United States. In South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, their early response, the fact that they were proactive, that they acted early, that they did an excellent job of contact tracing. They had tests, and South Korea was remarkable in that it ramped up the production of test kits very early, and they had enough test kits to figure out who had the virus to a very large extent, and so that underlines their success. Some countries that are capitalist, but still with socialist leadership, like Vietnam, very poor country, but Vietnam has handled this remarkably well through. I mean, they have a public health system. I mean, it's broken in some ways, but their public health system was able to do the contact tracing and the containment. In Europe, you see a differential response between Italy and Spain on the one hand, to some extent France, versus Germany. And so it got out of control in Italy and Spain, later on in France, and we had high death rates in these countries. Germany had greater, of course, it has a healthcare system that is more rigorous and more adequately resourced, and so they were able to do a little bit better in containment, but they did a lot better in terms of keeping the death rate low. So the German death rate is much lower than the other European countries. So yeah, the differential response is I mean, we really have to look at these to learn what works and what doesn't work.
Sharat, before I go to John Britton, who's next, hold on, let me mute there. Yeah, before I go to John Britton, I just, on this thing, if I may make a comment, you know, United States is organized differently. In other words, states are kind of more independent in certain respects, legally and traditionally, and which doesn't work out well in this case. The other thing, it seems to me, is that the United States has passed on from being a capitalist country to becoming a financial oligarchy. And this has happened during the time I have come into this country from 66 to now. So, and that's varying degrees. These countries are more financially, of course, Germany, it is true also. Anyway, seems to me, there are a number of elements that are playing into it so that it's not only the socialist country. For example, South Korea is not a socialist country and is managing this pretty well. Taiwan is not a socialist country, is managing it pretty well. You know, Vietnam is run by a socialist party, but Communist Party. So it's more like China. So there are different things. One of the articles today in LA Times said that Vietnam is a similar system to China, but their adversity with China has a reason for them to kind of keep a keen eye on China. So they were studying this thing and they took early action, very early action. Even before anybody was sick, they started shutting down things. So there are a number of factors playing into it. You're welcome to comment on any of that or ignore it, and then I can go to the next person who is waiting here, John Britton. So what would you like? You would like to respond to what I said?
So, yeah, I'll say only a little bit that it's this is not so much a question of, you know, whether the government has a socialist leadership or not. It has to do with the I think more the proactiveness, the question of whether there is a national healthcare policy. To what extent is the healthcare system privatized? And in the US, it's a disaster because A, we have no universal healthcare, and B, the medical system is to a large extent, it's almost, well, it's not 100%, but it's largely private. It's a largely private system and a for-profit system. So that's part of it. The other reason in the US that it's a disaster is because even though the states, I think it's okay for states to have to set policies, because the extent of the pandemic may differ from one state to another. The problem is that there's no national guidance. There's no national guidance that said, okay, this is the order in which we should open up. Okay, and so it's you have the inconsistency.
Okay, John Britton is next. Please, John, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Sharat for a very informative talk. And in response to Richard's point and some of the subsequent comments relating to it, I think one of the factors that should be kept in mind about the US's response is that the US is now undergoing, I think, a very serious crisis of leadership at the national level, which is reflected in who we have as president, and it's also reflected in who the Democrats have chosen as their presumptive candidate for the next election. I think this is a factor that certainly has to weigh on the response to the pandemic that we see. Now, various state officials are discussing opening up the economy, and some are actually beginning to do so, as has been noted. Sharat, do you have any estimate of how quickly this opening up can happen? Will it be a few weeks, a few months, a few years? Can you shed some light on that? Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for the question, John.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's well, it's not going to be a few years because I think the once we have a vaccine, we'll be able to open up. But of course, the vaccine won't be immediately available to everybody. So that deployment is going to take a bit of time. And even after the vaccine is here and we get everybody vaccinated, well, of course, there is a problem that even with vaccination, in some countries it's very difficult to get 100% vaccination, including in the U.S. I mean, even with like the flu, the annual flu vaccine, no matter how much we promote getting the flu vaccine, only something like 50% of the U.S. population actually gets the flu vaccination every year, or even in a given year. And then after the people are vaccinated, there's still the process of the economic recovery, and that's not going to be immediate, particularly in some industries. The travel industry, people are still going to be scared to travel for some time. What was I saying? So in terms of how we will open up, I think it's going to be a step-by-step process, and in the U.S. it's going to be a step-by-step process. That step-by-step process will be different in the various states. If we talk about right here in California, I see that what's going to happen is the availability of test kits. So there's going to have to be a major ramp up in the availability of test kits, so we can get close to 100% testing. So that, in other words, the goal here is to be able to know every person who gets infected and then put that person into quarantine. So if that can be achieved, then there can be a major opening up. And I don't see the availability of those test kits yet. I don't see that as being possible within the next 2 months. So there may be some selective opening up of for example, certain retail stores that are currently designated as non-essential. They might be able to open up with the physical distancing, people wearing masks. But things like dining in restaurants, I think that's going to take longer just because of the nature of the activity. And but that's what I can see for now, and it's hard to predict, but that's what I see.
Kim White is next.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Some echo is coming in, so somebody, whoever is causing the echo, which means probably their cell phone and computer are on at the same time. So go ahead, Kim. What happened? Oh, sorry. I accidentally muted him. Okay, Kim, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. No.
Okay. On the topic of labs of virology or biotech labs, I just wanted to recommend an article that came out on Friday. It's in salon.com, salon.com. It's by Sam Husseini, and it's called, "Did This Virus Come from a Lab? Maybe not, but it exposes the threat of a biowarfare arms race." It's got a lot of information in it. One of the tangential topics that we're learning now because of the COVID-19 virus is how many of these biowarfare labs exist all over the United States and around the world. So I would recommend that article. It's got a lot of information in it.
Okay, thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I assume we go to the next person. I don't see, okay, Norma is the next person. Hold on, Norma. I'm trying to unmute you. You have to unmute. Okay, yeah, okay. You're
People
on.
have been thinking that there might be some significant social changes. I want to know if anybody thinks that the bus driver is going to get paid a decent salary, and the farm worker and the school aide and all the lower paid people that live, well, on and on, that live in our society are going to get decent wages. And do people think that, well, there might be a good inroad to be made, that the proletariat will become the controllers of the means of production? Do you really see that happening as a result in this horrible arrangement that we live in, even though we're besieged by the virus?
Well, I unfortunately,
this is not just for you, Sharat. It's all the people who have been thinking, oh, things are really going to change or significantly change. So it's not a challenge to you, but you could say whatever you want.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that it's going to change the mode of production here, in terms of, who runs who controls production. But I'm hoping that raising the issue of essential workers, the honoring essential workers, is the theme of our May Day in San Jose. And so we are using every opportunity we have to raise this awareness. And I call upon everyone else to also amplify this, that every time you hear one of our elected leaders applaud the police and along with the paramedics as frontline responders, and they leave out the farm workers and the janitors, remind them that the farm workers, the janitors, and sanitation workers and grocery store workers are all essential workers, and we need to honor all of them. And they are the ones who are taking the risks because they cannot shelter in place.
Well, since Norma said it is for her comment, this question is for everybody, I just wanted to observe that the reason United States, and this is not my original thoughts, from Richard Wolff, he points out the reason why we don't have the protection gear or the personal protection equipment in the United States is because they offshored it, because you can't make profit when you make these things and there is no pandemic expected. So they were not actually making any of these things here. And China were making, but not because they were socialist. China is making everything. So China is the workshop of the world. And this is something they needed to make for themselves as the first set of people who needed it. And they have the ability to expand production very rapidly. Trump has not even gotten into this war production laws seriously enough. So the two societies are different. And I think the United States basically capitalism has gone into rotten stage. That would be my comment. So according to Lenin, this is ripe for overthrow. And so what you're desiring is probably the direction it's headed. But of course, who can predict what will happen? That's my thought on it. I'll develop more on it next week.
It's 12:30. I just want to put in, Vijay Prashad has said, well, they're treating hospital beds like real estate. They think they have, they have these time monitors who said you have to fill all the hospital beds, right? Which means there was no vacant hospital beds to take care of people. They didn't have the superfluity of care options in the event of something like this that keeps returning over and over. I love that the hospital bed is being treated like real estate, and it's very expensive on top of that.
Thank you. So Sharat, do you have some final thoughts before we adjourn?
Just that the pandemic is, I mean, it continues to hit us in all sorts of unexpected ways, and when it's sometimes in adversity, there are opportunities to there are lessons to be learned, and certainly this is one of them where it, if we don't get anything else out of it, at least let's learn the lessons and not repeat them, and this is also an opportunity to, as I mentioned earlier, to make a real start to arrest climate change.
Okay, thank you, and thanks to everybody. And we will be hoping to see everybody on next Sunday when I'm speaking, or as many people as feel interested in that subject, which will be also focused on the present crisis, not just Lenin historically, but as relevance to today's time. Hopefully, I'll be able to put together something interesting for everybody to listen and comment on. So until then, please stay safe, shop as you need to, but be safe. Thank you, Sharat. Thank you, Jean. And thank you, Mehmet, most of all, who arranges for this to be possible. And we'll see you again on next Sunday, 10:30.
Thank you very much for hosting, and thank you for attending.
Thank you. Bye now.
Raj,
Thank you.
Sharat.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Well done.